disability rights advocate and educator, and you also are recognized for your expertise in supporting the blind and low vision community. Conchita is focused now on the intersection of blindness and language learning. You are also a CEO of Metas, and she bridges access gaps for Spanish-speaking community. Your leadership actually extends to your appointment to the National Board for Educational Sciences, reflecting your part on inclusive education policy. Also from the US part, I'm truly wanting to introduce Diane Colburn. Diane, if you want to wave, I should ask everybody to wave. It says, Diane is a leader in vision rehabilitation with a master's in vision rehabilitation therapy and low vision rehabilitation from Salus University. Diane is currently the director of statewide services at the Maryland School for Blind, and your personal experience of hard of hearing enriches your professional work and making you a vital advocate for the visually impaired community. And last but not the least, I'm introducing Sylvia Yawungu, a special educational needs teacher and educator, and also sign language interpreter with 16 years in education. Sylvia holds a degree in special education, and she's very passionate for inclusive education in New Guinea, working to make special educational teaching approaches accessible for all learners. So, as you could see from all these important panelists, so I'm hoping that we're going to have a very interesting discussion. And then to start with this, we're going to start first. Allow me just a second to share my screen. Okay, so here on the current side. So we're going to start first with... present the view. Oh, no. From the start. Okay. With defining the concepts. So from just a second to bring my notes. Defining the concepts. How would you define? So our first question is, how would you define inclusive education, and in what ways differ from special education? Because understanding the distinctions between the two of them is crucial. Whilst both aim to support students with special needs, they do so through different approaches, philosophy, and methods. So, Amy, can I pass the baton to you first?
Absolutely. So with inclusive education versus special education, I mean, obviously there's some variation among countries and then also among different types of schools. Like in the US where I am, we have public schools, private schools, and homeschooling is an option, and each one of those looks different. But the primary defining concept is that inclusive education, the goal is to include us all. What I think is personally a really interesting thought here is we often think of inclusive education as including our special needs kids in with the mainstream. However, why do we think of it that way? Could we not think of it in reverse? Why don't we include mainstream in with our special needs students? Because we are constantly trying to say, oh, well, you should just come along and join us. And sometimes that works well. And then other times kids don't have the sensory processing, or they don't have, they get overloaded sometimes by the systems that everybody else finds comfortable. So if we reverse that thought and we are encouraging people to be inclusive in the other direction, I think that sometimes that is just a really interesting way of thinking about it, because a lot of times we say in the autistic community that what works well for autistics generally works well for everybody else. So instead of thinking in that way, I like to reverse it.
Absolutely, you are right. How is the situation in Kenya, Anne?
Thank you so much. Just as Annie has said, the definition of the term inclusive education and special needs education actually varies depending on the context. But I would want us to go back to the Salamanca inclusive education, because that is the Salamanca statement forms a strong basis for international legal standards for the implementation of inclusive education. So I'd want to say that inclusive education, way back, it used to refer to institutional placement, school placement. But you find that the term has actually changed so that we are looking at inclusive education as a whole. We are moving away from the concept of school placement to the concept of mainstream educational system that embraces the principle of universal access to education. So when we started inclusive education, we moved all our kids to regular mainstream schools. But we realized that within the regular mainstream schools, they ended up being excluded because we did not have the relevant accommodations to give them access to quality. So it didn't work. And therefore, we had to look for other solutions. What is the way forward? So in Kenya, therefore, we have moved to a whole educational system that provides for education, for inclusive education, by restructuring the education system to cater for all learners through the relevant legislation, through financing and budgetary allocations, and also through provision of an appropriate curriculum, that differentiated curriculum that is able to address the diverse needs of learners within the school. So it is no longer just the school, but it is a whole education system that provides for inclusion by enabling through various strategies and various means. So that's the situation in Kenya today.
So the difference actually, to summarize this, inclusive education often focuses on integration and accessibility, where special education can sometimes provide a very intensive, personalized level of support for students who may struggle in larger classroom settings. Diane, do you want to add anything in here?
I wanted to build off of what Amy and Anne were saying, is that, I think what we're getting at is that inclusive education needs to be thought of as a practice, not so much as a setting, and that accessibility in those spaces and with that material is what is going to create the inclusion. So the student could be in a self-contained classroom with mixed different levels of ability and everything, but if the accessibility is there. Special education itself is comprised of specially designed instruction, which is modifying the content, the materials, and the presentation so it's based on the best practices and it works for that individual and who has the disability. So
absolutely right. So moving now into the student experience, and I'm sure that I will hear from you as well. Let's talk about the impact of inclusive classrooms. And this is really important. So Sylvia, I'm going to point the button to you. From your perspective, how do students with special needs benefit from an inclusive classroom environment? So for instance, are there a situation where a specialized educational setting is more appropriate than inclusive education? Sylvia? You are muted, I think. We cannot hear you. Is Conchita still here?
I think Conchita needed to hop off.
Okay, so till Sylvia is fixing her problem, Amy, what will be from your perspective? What do you? moving into the student experience and how the students with special needs benefit from inclusive classroom experience environment.
The lovely thing about an inclusive classroom is that you get to participate with the entire school, the entire classroom, other students who do not learn exactly the same way you do. I know that previously when we were focusing more on just special education, at least in the States, a lot of times children were kind of relegated to these little rooms at the back of the school and they never got to interact with the other students. So I think the primary benefit is the relationships we build, not so much the education as it is the relationships, because we are relational beings and we learn so much from being together and learning about each other's differences and seeing that there is not just one way of learning or doing life.
Absolutely. Diane, would you like to add in here?
Sure, I would love to jump in. Thank you for that, Amy. I think you brought up a really good point that sometimes being around others who are similar to you can give you that sense of identity. And so as a representative from a school for the blind, sometimes we always would love for our students to be in a mainstream school, of course, but by coming to a school for the blind, they get opportunities that they may not have there, which could be participating in adapted sports teams, playing goalball, playing blind soccer, being able to go to a dance where nobody else knows because you have to learn dances visually, having those opportunities. So it's about what weighs that in. And in the US, we use a framework of least restrictive environment. And you have to look at all of the factors in that student's education of what creates that environment.
Absolutely pointed out, and I'm going to pass the baton to Anne as well. So just I'm adding from the research point of view and also from my own experience, because I work in mainstream school and in special needs school, is students with special needs will experience social, emotional, even academic growth, learning alongside their peers. So they are exposed to more social interactions. They can improve their communication and their confidence. And at the same time, there are instances, for instance, when a specialized setting will be more appropriate if the student has high needs. So I had that students that will require specialist resources, that will require therapists, which will be quite challenging to deliver in a larger classroom. So I think balancing the options of two, and I think also having students from mainstream school visiting a special needs school, that actually they enhance and their understanding, like you just pointed out, Diane, but the fact that actually they benefit by being exposed to this, increasing their empathy, increasing their awareness of what is happening, and vice versa. And from your side, what would you add in here in this educational experience in creative, inclusive classrooms?
I would agree with what the rest of you have said, Annie, Diana, and yourself. And I would want to emphasize the fact that actually inclusive education ensures that students with disabilities have equal access to education opportunities, resources, and facilities that they would not have gotten access to if they went to segregated schooling. Because in Kenya, you'd find that special schools, when we used to have full schools that were fully special, what would happen is that sometimes the regular mainstream schools will be given facilities first, and then later on, whatever remains is given to learners with disabilities. But now with the inclusivity, it is very easy for us now to get children with disabilities accessing equal education opportunities. It has also eliminated the physical attitudinal barriers we have had over the years. And therefore, the children are able to grow together regardless of their differences in their ability. And just as you have rightfully said, this is also only meaningful if those with severe disabilities also get access to individualized services. Like if there is a child who needs speech therapy, do they have access to speech therapy? If there is a child who needs auditory rehabilitation, can they be able to get auditory rehabilitation within the inclusive education system? So at the end of the day, the individual being able to address individual learner aspects actually helps to make inclusive education more meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia, have you fixed your, can we hear you now? Can anybody help from the backstage? Sylvia? I'm sorry that we're experiencing today. It looks like there are, yes, can we hear you now? No. You might have to maybe come out and join back again. Try that, maybe that will work. So we talked about, and I think this is such an interesting subject, inclusive education versus special needs education. We talk about the educational experiences, having inclusive classroom versus specialist settings. Now, it is a really important topic in here, and absolutely all stems from identifying the students and the children's, how we call them, strengths, areas and areas of development, because everything has to be tailored around their needs. So we do know that inclusion is great in theory, but actually really complex in practice. So we know that teachers play an important role in the success of the inclusive education, and they need adequate support. So in your opinion, as panelists, what types of professional development and resources do you believe are essential for teachers to effectively support inclusive classroom? Diane, shall I pass the button to you?
I'm happy to start off. So I can only speak from my experience at a school for the blind, and I oversee all of our outreach efforts, and that means we are covering our entire state and occasionally out-of-state requests that when teachers that are not just teachers for the blind and low vision might have a student who is blind or has no vision with additional disabilities in their class. They are looking for resources. They are looking for that help to be able to keep them and make sure they can access. And that's something that our outreach team provides. If they reach out to us, we can then utilize all of our resources that we have at the school. So we have physical therapists and occupational therapists that work with students who are blind and have this level of experience. So we can offer those consultative coaching experiences to our teachers and other related providers around the state. That allows us to have this really branching of resources, and that keeps us collaborative in the school systems. It lets us be really at the forefront of what's actually happening in the school, so we can adjust our curriculum to be able to better meet the needs if a student gets sent to us. And we launch statewide initiatives to kind of level the playing field for everybody and encourage that participation. And so making sure that teachers know that they have a resource that they can go to. We ask them yearly to complete surveys about what kind of training they would like for the coming year. So we'll offer webinars. We offer webinars for the parents too, so they can are empowered to be able to talk to the teachers, and they can have these collaborative conversations. Because as you said, inclusive education is great in theory, but it's really complex, and every single student is an individual. You have to look at them separately. So anytime somebody asks me for a checklist, I'm like, well, when you meet one kid with special needs, you've met one kid with special needs, and that is what that specially designed instruction is.
Thank you so much, Diane. This is a very valuable comments that you made. Amy, what would you add in here? How can schools actually help teachers feel more equipped and confident in this mission? Because I think this is paramount, isn't it?
Yes, I agree with Diane that this is definitely a lot harder to put into practice, because it really does come down to relationships, how we treat each other, how we see each other, the tone the teacher sets in the classroom. And a lot of that training is really going to come not just from the trainings that we provide, but also from the relationships that teacher has. If you have a teacher who is working with let's say, autistic children, for instance, and they have friends who are autistic adults, that's going to give them a completely different perspective than a teacher who has been in a webinar, because they are hearing the lived experience of other people. And I think one of the things that we can do in school situations is to try to seek out from our current students, how do you like school? If they aren't happy or they don't like it, we need to pay attention to that. Because it means we need to make some adjustments somewhere. And also talking to people who have graduated from the school setting that you're in, who also have disabilities. How could we have done this better? And just continuing to ask that question. I think that is the most important.
Absolutely. Totally agree that ensuring that the teachers actually have efficient tools and resources. And this is basically what PAGS is about, the management tool that can help learners and educators. I think this is paramount, because teachers, there has to be this communication channels as well, that they have to know that they can seek advice, they can share concerns, and they can collaborate on strategies. Their well-being is the classroom well-being. So if we look after them and support them in this growth, they will be able to support. And this is so important, because you pointed out a really, really important thing, is that they will need specific strategy. They will need help to be able to differentiate this instruction, or, for instance, behavior management technique, to be tailored to for inclusive settings. And also this collaborative planning time in between the special needs coordinators, professionals like education psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, that all those resources that will be incorporated to the team around the child to actually support the child. And by cultivating as well as school leaders, because I've been as well as school leader, is a culture where the teachers feel empowered and supported in implementing inclusive practices. And how is the situation? Because you've been at a very high level in actually involved in drawing these policies.
Thank you so much. Just as my fellow panelists have alluded, implementation of inclusive education is quite a complex process. It is easier said than done. But one of the fundamental questions we need to ask when implementing inclusive education is, do the teachers have the relevant skills to handle the diverse needs of the learners that they are going to find in their classroom and in their school? Secondly, do these teachers also have the right attitudes to demonstrate the learner, to demonstrate the value for learner diversity? Because if the teacher devalues the ability of the learner to learn the skills they are teaching, then it might not work for the teacher. And finally, you find that inclusive education actually requires the teachers to have the right skills, the teaching strategies, in order to ensure universal access to learning, UDL. So do the teachers have those skills? So the best way forward, just as we have done in Kenya, because we are in the process of introducing the implementing the competence-based curriculum, which is also differentiated. And we know that differentiated curriculum is very, very important, because it provides for learners, for each learner to be taught within their own ability. So in the course of that, therefore, what we are doing in Kenya is that we are now having continuous teacher capacity building and professional development, because pre-service and in-service has not really been able to address that. So you want the teachers are now undertaken through continuous professional development courses, depending on the type of learners that they find within their classroom. So this helps us now to give the teacher hands-on skills within their context to address the diverse needs of the learners that they will find in their classrooms.
Absolutely. Sylvia, have you fixed? Can you take the floor now? Is it possible? No, we cannot hear you. Still cannot hear you. Okay, so she, talking about the teaching and being a teacher myself, I want to share my experience as a teacher and how difficult it can be sometimes. And the fact that in my class, I have 3 groups of children. So I have the profound multiple learning difficulties with the mild learning difficulties with the high functioning. So I was preparing at the time 3 lessons in 1 lesson to be able to differentiate the outcomes, to be able to accommodate the environment, to have resources and object of reference for the students who are at that level to understand, to have also for the 5 functioning ones, also a lesson that will be challenging and then increasing it. So teaching profession is really demanding. It's very rewarding, but at the same time is a demanding job, because you are all the time confronted with, you have to understand the classroom, you have to provide, you have to impart your knowledge, and you all the time have to be kept abreast with everything in terms of research, and it was continuous. So when I was ahead, I was making sure that our teachers actually are feeling supported, listened, understood, and their continued professional development to happen on and on. As we just said, we had teachers from University of Winchester joining us for 1 semester when they did the inclusion package, for them to understand what is actually happening in the classroom and practice how you adapt a lesson to be inclusive. So creating this atmosphere and this continued professional development, I think, is paramount, and that will, I'm hoping that this will be taken in the next conversations by Professor Sigamoni. He involved himself into drawing policy in South Africa at the country level. So in this part, because we all been through this, supporting teacher, we understand is really important. How else can we meet the classroom needs? What kind of resources we can put in front of the teachers to be able to increase the students' engagement, in your opinion? Amy?
A lot of it depends on the student, I think. Obviously, like, technology is a great tool that we have that we didn't used to have. But I also really do think that sometimes we underestimate the power of relationships. Relationships between teacher and student, relationships between students, and also, I mean, really, when you think about it, learning is building relationships with people in the past, people in the present, all these different things. And it's that relationship building that is really true learning, because we can memorize all the facts, but if we haven't really connected with the material, and it hasn't really become a part of who we are, then have we really learned? And so I think trying to think about, okay, how can we make those relational connections is really critical. I personally have been very inspired by the work of Charlotte Mason, who is an educational philosopher in England. She had some similarities to some of the educational philosophers in America around the 1800s. And I love what she talked about how, you know, the child is the one who does the learning. They are the one who scratches out their own worms, so to say. We're trying to come to the table to understand and to connect and see what we take away from it. And I think that above any tool we use is what's most important, and it doesn't take a lot of extra funding.
Absolutely. So we can use the technology to harness this, to increase the students' engagement and to facilitate learning. So we do have today assistive technology that can actually help us to do this more. And we have a lot of learning apps. You pointed really right, the fact that relationship remains paramount, that making that connection, really human connection. And we know what what COVID actually did us, because they put us online. So everybody has to be teaching online. So that was something. But at the same time, we can draw from that experience to actually take how do we harness to make the technology to work in our favor now that we have AI, we have, how do you do this enhanced for teaching? So to present the content in a way that is engaging, but also doesn't make us addicted. Yeah, to provoke curiosity and at the same time to spark interest. I think combining the worlds in what we have, the human part, with the technology part, I think can help us a lot. Diane, what would you like to share from your side? Because your experience as well would be valuable to this.
Sure. I think everything we've already mentioned are great. And I love the relationship building. And part of that relationship building really starts with how we as teachers are looking at our students. Are we holding them to high expectations? Is our first encounter with that student, and yes, you can do this, or is it we're looking at all of those papers we get and, oh, they're not going to be able to? And empowering a teacher to be able to see that, because the longer you're in this field, the easier it is to get kind of disengaged from it and start thinking, well, this kid can't. And if we walk into it with high expectations, then that student is going to be engaged, and we're going to be able to enhance our teaching using the good content and bringing in assistive technology. If I'm sitting in a classroom and my student doesn't understand and they can tell me or show me or explain, how can I make this better for you? And I will try 1,000 different things until we've connected. And so always deferring back to what that student needs and what's going to make it, but going in with the expectation that they can learn this.
Thank you, Diane. Ed, would you like to add anything in here? Because I think it's really interesting conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. For us in the developing countries, ICT might not be accessible to most of the schools, although we are trying for most of them. But what I would want to mention is the fact that actually special education is expensive. Even when we are mainstreaming it within the regular schools, children with special needs still require specialized resources for them to be able to get access to quality education. For example, they might require a lot of needs, like those who are visually impaired might require adaptation and a transcription of learning materials. This has financial requirements. But some of the assistive devices that they use need care and maintenance. It is also very, very expensive. Some of the children or within the classrooms, they need auxiliary supports, teacher support, the auxiliary staff to support the teachers within the class, and many other needs that may arise depending on the learners that you are handling within that school. So what I'd want to bring forward is for inclusive education to work, then education systems should be ready to also invest in financing and ensuring budgetary allocations to meet the needs of the learners in their specific classes. In Kenya, we talk a lot about low cost, no cost resources, but sometimes they are not very easy to come by. So I really want to emphasize on financing and budgetary allocation. In Kenya, yes, we have what we call top-up grants. So children with special needs are given more grants than the regular children, in the understanding that their needs might require more financing as compared to the regular children. So financing, budgetary allocations by the education systems is a must if inclusive education has got to work. That is my view. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And absolutely right. In the UK, we have our new premier. So the focus would be in the next year on the SEND and the challenges that arises. Also recruiting more than 6,500 teachers, and also increasing the budget that will solve the SEND crisis. Because now there's a lot. There are some funds allocated. We have in the UK Education and Health and Care Plan that are supported by local authorities, but together you have to have at least a 6 months waiting list, and till you have the plan done, and if the local authority will have to support it. So this is cumulative and collated. All this information take time. You are right. It's super important for us to have the policy that will provide the financing and also will allow us to make available those tools for the teachers and also for the child. And having a way of tracking those finances will be really important. And basically, we have built that into PAC, so I keep talking about that. Inclusive, finally, so we talk about the difference in between inclusive education and versus special needs education. We look at what accommodation we do in the classroom, and also what the kind of support we need to provide to the teachers. Now, let's talk about the day-to-day strategies that will make a difference. Because we know that what kind of specific teaching methods or classroom management practices have you found most effective in promoting inclusion for students with special needs? And what practical approach that can actually make inclusion more accessible to everyone? Would you share from your perspective, Diane?
Sure, absolutely. So I want to speak about the consistent classroom routines and making sure no matter what my classroom is, that everybody knows what we're starting with, what comes next, and being able to adapt a schedule. And scheduling is something that I think we all take for granted, but if I am in a classroom of 6 blind and low vision learners, some of them are going to need it in Braille, some of them may need a tactile schedule, some of them may need a visual schedule, some of them can do it on their technology. Being able to differentiate so they can even access that schedule to be able to follow their routine, and that is done through the collaborative service planning. So all of your related service providers with the case manager, with the teacher, and all of the more communication that is happening within that team and within that classroom, it is going to allow you to be able to manage all of those kids and all of their needs, and what that stack looks like. And I think something that gets overlooked is the teachers don't always need to have all of the answers, but they need to know where to look to be able to pull the answers from. And so I would never want to put one of my teachers in a position where they have to walk into a classroom and think they have to know everything. But if they can know, oh, I can reach out to this person, or I have this resource at my hand and this resource at my disposal, being able to do that. And that's where that collaborative planning comes in, even outside of the framework of the IEP or the service plan, depending on where you are.
Excellent. Amy, I'm sure that you will have loads to say in here, strategies and techniques.
One of my favorite things, and I've worked in public schools, I've worked in private schools, and I've also worked with homeschool families. And one of the things I've gotten to learn being in that small homeschool setting where you kind of get a microcosm of the schools as a whole is that when we think about differentiating instruction, I think a lot of times we think about it in terms of how can I teach this differently? But I think it's also important to remember that each child has different goals when we are learning something. So for some people, it's going to be just kind of catching the basic gist or whatever we're talking about. For others, it's going to be making connections with something else that they've already learned and taking a deeper dive. But the question remains, how do we help you access the material? And that, I think, is the really important part of differentiating instruction. So in our very tiny homeschool, I have one child who learned to read at 9.5, and I have another who learned to read at 2. So they have dramatically different needs. And there's only one of me. And so what I have learned is that for my child who has more trouble with understanding what is read, that child needs visual inputs. So either we watch a video about a book before we read it, or we make sure we include a version of the book that includes pictures. And then for the other child who understands fine but struggles with the reading, I read it aloud to remove that barrier. And so we're thinking about how do we remove barriers? How do we provide supports that can help you access the material, but also what are the goals for each individual student? Because they're not all going to learn and take away the same thing from the same lesson.
Absolutely right. Anne, what would you add in here? You have a rich experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think most of what I would have said has already been covered, but I would want to emphasize the fact that universal teaching methodologies and approaches require a lot of teacher collaboration and requires a lot of creativity. Then the other thing that I'd want to bring up is that parental involvement, parental engagement is very, very key, so that we have a connection between what goes on in the school, in the classroom, and what goes on at home or within the family that the child is being brought up. If there is that home-school collaboration, parents' engagement, parents' empowerment, I think that is a major addition that can help inclusive education to be successful and can be a very important success network for the teachers who are handling the needs of the learners. Just as Annie has said, it can be quite overwhelming when as an individual teacher you are handling this child. But when there is collaboration between the teachers within the school, within the classroom, and the home, and if the parents are also empowered, then things may work better for that particular child. Thank you.
Absolutely right. Sylvia, are you able to add something? We are terribly sorry that we have this failed connection. Sylvia really made an effort, and we had a one-to-one discussion, and I'm sure that you have lots of things to impart in here with the audience, and I can only say sorry for what are you experiencing as troubleshooting and having no audio. I will add in here this as really important for us that effective strategies as promoting inclusion also involve like flexible grouping, like I experienced myself, developing skills. We know in school that 50% of knowledge coming from the learning processes, or the other 50 are coming from developing our skills, ability, or cognitive ability to execute the executive functioning. So I think that's why I put in that pyramid developing skills that will enable the child to access the academic curriculum is really important. Also having bringing technology, and I know in some country we talk about global summit in here, will be facing financial issues, but where technology can play a valuable role, can multiply basically the what teachers are doing in the classroom and can be continued at home. That collaboration, homeschool professionals is paramount. And also to have adaptive learning platform that will allow students with diverse abilities to engage in a way that actually suits their individual needs. So with my students, we have also had topic projects. When we had topic projects that will be developed in Tempest, would have been taught in different lessons in English as well as in geography, and collaborate. So that meaningful approach to the child was making really our project with Romans. We just went we made costumes, we made drama and play. We got everybody involved, even the head teachers had to work. So it was like a festive day. So that was a memorable experience for the students as well as for the staff. So is that promoting the teamwork and the mutual respect and the relationship? So if we wrap it all up to make like a conclusion from here is, I could see that. So PAGS is one of the solutions as digital companion that could be addressed for the schools and for the educators, and the fact that starts with assessing the child and also delivering the resources and strategies and keeping track of everything that is going on in the classroom, that communication and that developing of the relationship, Amy, that you just mentioned. And we can find us as on the www.pagsprofile.com. So I want to thank you both, all of you, for this panel. And to summarize our discussion, we have explored the difference in between special needs education and inclusive education. We looked at the tangible benefits that inclusive environments can provide, and also for especially for social and academic growth, and the identified need for strong support and continued professional development of our educators. Also, we have talked about sharing some valuable resources. So I know that for the audience that they will get as a follow-up a PowerPoint, this PowerPoint as well, some strategies that you kindly said you're going to share with them. And let's leave here thinking how each of us can contribute to create inclusive spaces where every child feels supported and valued. Thank you, everyone, for this valuable panel.
And I can't echo that strongly enough, Felicia. Thank you. What a wonderful, rich offering your panel and yourself have given us today. I listened avidly. In fact, I broke all the rules and I came back into the webinar instead of being backstage, because I was fascinated by the variety of responses. So thank you, everybody, all your panels. You know, the takeaway from me were things like resources. You know, without decent resources, this is a very difficult thing, either to encourage mainstreaming or to even do proper special needs education, you know, and resources are a key thing here. And once again, the culture of the country towards education is key here. Very often, this seems to be the problem. So I loved each and every one of your input, and thank you so much for that. I was saying to Ken backstage that this particular subject, and I'm sure I could probably say this about all of them, but this one in particular, I think, would justify a 2 or 3 hour webinar, and we ought to do that again. So I'd certainly like to suggest that we repeat this exercise and have a bit more time, because there's an extraordinary polarity almost between the two issues. And before I introduce our next moderator and speaker, apropos of what I've just been listening to, one of the things that I advocate strongly, of course, is attitude, and how attitude is the be all and end all, really. And let me tell you a little story. Some years ago, a good 15 years ago, I came across 3 youngsters in a mainstream school. 2, 1 low vision, 1 totally blind, and 1 quite significantly cerebral palsy. In sense of language or rather the actual speech was difficult. Everything else was fine. And they were doing extremely well in this mainstream school until the head teacher left. And the new head teacher came in, and it was a disaster. And within months, all 3 left. And so so a lot of this is about leadership. A lot of this is about attitude. And I remember from my own experience as a youngster in a mainstream school, I had the most wonderful experiences of some of the most caring and innovative teachers, both at school and university. And I had some horror stories. So unfortunately, this actually boils down to the human element. So thank you very much, panelists. Thank you so much.